So Rocko's Modern Life, Static Cling is the revival film, the classic Nickelodeon show Rocko's Modern Life. Now, it's interesting because it's interesting. I think how this film kind of evolved because like when it was in the original show in the 1990s was interesting because it was all about kind of like 20 something adults mostly, and it dealt with very adult scenarios and themes. And so now we return to the show 20 years later in this revival film, and it does actually take place 20 years later. In a in a much different story, even though the characters don't look like they've aged that much at all. Especially when you take into context where the show ended, it doesn't really make that much sense. But whatever, it's cartoon logic. It's flexible, whatever. So we get more Rocko's Modern Life. Now this is an interesting premise though, because the premise is that Rocko, Filbert, and Heifer have been floating around in space for 20 years. Since the show ended. And since they've been stuck in space, Rocko has been constantly watching the Fatheads on a orange VHS tape, which is a not so subtle reference to Nickelodeon tapes. And eventually they find a way to get back home, which is pretty hilarious. And once they get back home, they realize the world has changed. It's not the 90s anymore. Now, Heifer and Filbert adapt pretty quickly to the new environment. They like the new amount of technology. They love the they love the food trucks. They love the new O phones. Because they exist in O town, so everything's got to have an O in front of it. So they adapt pretty well. Rocko, however, and it's true to his nature. Rocko was always this very pensive wallaby. Very very nervous and very a little unsure of himself. Is understandably shocked by 1990s culture. The lack of 1990s culture. So he thinks that I can always return to the Fatheads. And he thinks like, the Fatheads was my favorite cartoon. I could just return to that. But apparently it's not playing anymore. They're not making any new episodes, and so Rocko feels like there's nothing left for him. 20 years later, he feels like he can't adjust to this new environment, and so he wants more Fatheads episodes. Now, the only way to get them is to, convince a studio to make more of them. So Rocko goes to his neighbor Ed Bighead's company that he works at, Conglamo, which is a very not so subtle reference here to Viacom. In fact, it's pretty blatant what it's trying to reference here, and tries to convince Conglamo to invest in a Fatheads cartoon. And they're pretty open to this, considering that now the company is facing bankruptcy, and not only could they go out of business, but O-Town could lose all their revenue and money because of this. So Ed, realizing that Ed Bighead, even though he doesn't like Rocko, realizes that his job is on the line. So he decides like, okay, we'll make these Fatheads episodes. Now, the only way to make these Fatheads episodes in Rocko's mind is that you got to get the original creator back, and the creator was Ed Bighead's son. I can't believe I blanked on his son's name for it. Oh shoot, was I had the castles up and everything. Ralph. Yeah. So he needs to get Ralph back because you might remember in the show, Ralph Bighead developed the Fatheads, and he helped them make the Wacky Deli cartoon, which was a very, like I said, not so subtle references here. It's clearly meant to represent Joe Murray, mostly because the series creator Joe Murray does voice the character of Ralph in the show. Now, once Rocko finds Ralph, however, he doesn't find Ralph. He finds Rachel. And Rachel is essentially, the new version of Ralph. Ralph has, become like transgender, is now a trans woman. So now it's no longer Ralph, it's Rachel. And so he decides to bring Rachel back to make the Fatheads. But when Ed is confronted with her, he's like, no, I can't accept this. This is too weird. It's too much change. And so it becomes pretty clear and blatant what this film is trying to say. I mean, it's a special. It's only about like 45 minutes, I think. But it's pretty clear what this film is trying to say. It's pretty clear that, it's all about, change and how, like the times are changing and you have to adjust to them. And what's interesting is that Rocko and Ed are essentially kind of the villains here, but villains in the sense that they have to change and that they're holding the film back from these other aspects. I mean, in the grander scheme of things, yeah, Conglamo is the enemy here, which kind of becomes more apparent as the film goes on and makes its commentary much more blatant throughout the film. But I like the fact that it addresses Rocco and Ed both having problems. I mean, Ed kind of represents, like the family who's not willing to accept when their family members change or be trans. And Rocco is meant to represent, like the toxic fandom that isn't willing to accept that like a show is gone or if a show changes. Because at one point, Rachel does eventually work on the Fatheads revival. But once Rocco sees it, he's kind of like, they added something in there. And I don't like that. This makes this terrible. What's wrong with you all? Why do you all like this? And it kind of has to. The film essentially, provides commentary on here by saying that, look, it's not that bad to change. In fact, it's actually an important aspect to it, because the thing about Rocko's Modern Life is, I could just see some people saying, oh, Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling got woke because it has a trans character. But the thing is, like, Rocko's Modern Life was always kind of a little bit progressive in that sense. Especially when it came to sexuality. I mean, there was an episode in Rocko's Modern Life where Ed Bighead becomes obsessed with wanting to be a clown. And he hides it. He tries to hide it from his family and from his office. And he feels like he's the only one and feels like, if he reveals it, people are going to hate him. That, it's going to destroy his lifestyle. It's quite clearly meant to represent the gay experience. And there's a lot of sexual stuff. I mean, if you go back and watch Rocko's Modern Life, there's a lot of sexual innuendo throughout that show. And it's not even just like Animaniacs, where it's kind of like one or two little bits. It's pretty rampant throughout the show that there's a lot of commentary on a lot of sexual innuendo present. I mean, for God's sakes, there's an episode where they get a giant vacuum cleaner that literally sucks up a head of Freud. So it's pretty blatant here. But I like the fact that, with Static Cling, it kind of does grow with the audience and tries to maintain that modern aspect. It's not just, despite the fact that, a lot of people are going to be championing this film, saying that, oh, the 1990s are back, nostalgia, it's running rampant again. It's like it's just like the old show. And in a sense, yes, Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling does kind of represent, pretty much most of the values that the original series was meant to represent. But it also grows along with it too. It realizes that, if it's still going to be Rocko's Modern Life, then it has to modernize. It has to grow up with the adult audience. And I love the fact that the film can do this, but at the same time, kind of like, break off the shackles. Like, we've seen this happen a lot with cartoons in the 21st century, where a lot of like older cartoons from the 90s can finally break off the shackles of censorship for kids and try to tackle bigger stuff. Sometimes it doesn't work, like when John Kay did the Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon, where you realize, oh man, maybe you should have had those handcuffs back on you before. But sometimes we can actually get some pretty neat stuff that explore bigger themes, kind of like with when Genny Tartakovsky returned to Samurai Jack for its final season. He did the final season on Adult Swim and was able to do more stuff with it. And Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling, it definitely falls in the camp of like Samurai Jack, where it can do more stuff. It can shake off the shackles. It doesn't have to hide behind, like clown metaphors and innuendos and stuff like that. Even though there's a very blatant dick innuendo towards the end of this film in particular. But it realizes that, its audience are now, big boys and girls, and they can handle, more adult subjects without hiding behind a lot of allegory. I mean, this film quite clearly attacks a lot of big targets. It tackles toxic masculinity. It tackles transphobia. It tackles, capitalism. It tackles, banking on nostalgia. There's all these different aspects that, and I mean, if you go back and look at Rocko's Modern Life, it does the same thing. Like, it savages a lot of it tackles a lot of like adult issues and modern scenarios that like adults would be involved in, stuff like credit card debt and being laid off and public transportation and commuting. It covers a lot of stuff that people can relate to, and that's essentially how Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling would have to proceed if it wants to still maintain that aspect and not just be a love letter, more or less, of just the nostalgia from the original film. And I like the fact, like, and Joe Murray has covered this in a few interviews, like, he was all about wanting to have, like, the Rachel character in here. He wanted this script very much so. I mean, Nickelodeon was hesitant at first, but they eventually warmed up to the idea. And yeah, it tackles the issue of changing times, which I think, if you're going to make a show that's going to revive something for nostalgia's sake, I think that's a very important topic to touch on. And it makes the film more insightful and interesting and commentarial. My only gripe with the film is just that it feels just a little bit short. It feels like I kind of feel like it should have gone just a little bit longer and just to touch on some more stuff. But again, it's 45 minutes. It's special. They could play it on television. I think they were going to plan to at one point, but then it didn't quite pan out, so now it ended up on Netflix. But I really enjoyed this film. I think it touches on a lot of the stuff that I love from Rocko's Modern Life. Everything. I mean, the animation too. We got to mention that the animation is gorgeous. It's over the top. It's exaggerated. It doesn't feel stale. In fact, there's even a brilliant jab at modern computer animation in there, realizing that sometimes remakes can lack that quality, and I think Joe Murray does a great job bringing that back into the fold here. That it feels both nostalgic and an update at the same time, which I think is great. I think it's gonna appease fans and maybe bring in some new people into the fold as well. So, and that's ultimately what I think you'd want out of a revival film like this. Is you want it to be welcoming to both, like, fans and new people, and not just just be just for the fans. Like, have something that's actually going to get people interested in Rocko's Modern Life and get them talking about it. And maybe go back and watch the original series, because I went back and watched some of those original episodes. Oh, they're wonderful. In particular, I love the episode where Heifer and Filbert dress up as Ed and pretend to be him, because Ed has lost his mind and Mrs. Bighead needs someone to read Ed's speech at his company. The central plot of that was a more adult story about Mrs. Bighead, becoming like a working wife. But the side of Heifer and Filbert was just hilarious to me. So there's a lot of great. It's just a brilliant show, and it's a brilliant revival film that does it justice. So for Rocko's Modern Life, Static Cling, 4.5 out of 5 stars.